January 12, 1943. The village of Elne, southern France. Elisabeth Eidenbenz stood in the doorway of the Maternité Suisse with an infant less than 4 hours old sleeping against her shoulder. Behind her, 2 women in advanced pregnancy sat at the kitchen table, their breathing shallow. Outside, a Vichy police captain shifted his weight from boot to boot, the requisition order folded in his coat pocket. He had come to inform her that the building would be commandeered for military storage by the end of the month. All residents were to be returned to the internment camps from which they had come. "The mothers stay," she said. He looked past her into the converted château. He could see the women. He could see the line of cradles against the far wall. She did not move. The infant's tiny fist curled against her collarbone. If she stepped aside, 23 mothers and 31 newborns would be on a deportation list by morning. This is the story of a woman who built a clandestine maternity hospital in occupied France and pulled nearly 600 newborns into the world while fascism tried to erase them. She falsified birth records, forged identity papers, and hid Jewish infants from deportation lists. She worked with almost no medicine, no heat, and almost no recognition. When authorities tried to shut her down, she became a wall. They could not move. Her name was Elisabeth Eidenbenz, and history nearly forgot her entirely. She was born in 1913 in Wille, a small village in the Swiss canton of Zurich, to a family that believed service was the highest form of faith. By the time Elisabeth was 20, she had trained as a nurse and volunteered with the Swiss Red Cross. In 1937, she crossed into Spain. The Spanish Civil War had turned the country into a slaughterhouse. Refugees, mostly women, children, and the elderly, fled north toward France in waves that grew larger as Franco's forces closed in. By early 1939, tens of thousands had poured over the Pyrenees. The French government, overwhelmed and unwilling, herded them into makeshift internment camps along the Mediterranean coast. These camps had no real shelter, no latrines, no medical care. People slept on sand. They drank from communal troughs. Elisabeth arrived at the camp in Argelès-sur-Mer in February 1939. What she saw there stayed with her for the rest of her life. Newborns delivered in the open air, wrapped in newspaper, dying within hours. She watched a mother give birth beside a barbed wire fence and then beg a guard for a scrap of cloth to cover the baby. The guard turned away. She would not let another child be born on sand. By October 1939, she had found a building, a grand but crumbling château in the village of Elne, just a few kilometers inland. She convinced the Swiss Red Cross to fund basic supplies. She convinced skeptical French officials to look the other way. Then she opened the doors. The Maternité Suisse d'Elne. At first, the mothers came from the internment camps, Spanish refugees, Romani women, political exiles. Later, after Germany occupied northern France and the Vichy regime took control of the south, Jewish women began arriving in secret. By 1942, the deportations had begun. Any Jew registered on an official list was marked for transport to the east. Pregnant Jewish women were especially vulnerable. The maternity became a sanctuary, a place where names could be changed and births could be recorded under false identities. Elisabeth kept 2 sets of records. One was official, submitted to the local authorities as required. The other was hidden, a leather-bound registry with ink-stained pages containing the real names of the mothers and the true circumstances of each birth. She locked it in a drawer beneath a loose floorboard in her office, her fingers still smudged with fresh ink from the last false entry. If that book were ever discovered, everyone inside the building would be arrested. The work was constant. She boiled water on a wood stove, scrubbed linens by hand, and rationed the small supply of disinfectant she managed to secure through Swiss contacts. Most births happened without anesthesia. When a newborn struggled to breathe, she cleared its airway with her fingers and rubbed its chest until the lungs opened. When a mother hemorrhaged, she pressed towels into the wound and held them there until the bleeding slowed. One winter night in 1941, she delivered twins to a Spanish refugee who had walked 8 kilometers through snow to reach the maternity. The first infant came easily. The second did not. Elisabeth worked for 40 minutes in near total darkness, the only light coming from a single candle on the windowsill. When the second baby finally emerged, silent and blue, she held it against her chest and breathed warm air across its face until the tiny lungs shuddered open. The mother wept. Elisabeth wrapped both infants in the cleanest blankets she had and placed them in a single cradle near the stove. She didn't know yet that keeping mothers alive would be the easiest part of the work. One afternoon in early 1942, a young Jewish woman named Rachel arrived at the maternity in the back of a vegetable cart, 8 months pregnant and barely conscious. She had escaped from the Refused-597 internment camp the night before, crawling under a fence during a rainstorm. Her papers identified her as Rachel Levy. That name would get her deported. Elisabeth sat beside her and spoke quietly. "When the baby is born, we'll give it a new name, a safe name. Do you understand?" 3 days later, she delivered a daughter. Elisabeth recorded the birth in the official register under the name Marie Fontaine, listing the mother as a French Catholic widow from Lyon. The real name, Rachel's name, went into the hidden book, ink still wet on the page. But one forged birth certificate would soon bring a Gestapo officer directly to her door. By mid-1942, the maternity had delivered over 200 babies. Word had spread among refugee networks. Jewish families fleeing roundups began arriving at irregular hours, sometimes in the middle of the night, sometimes just before dawn. The confrontations with authorities became routine. Vichy police appeared at irregular intervals, sometimes with orders to inspect the facility, sometimes with lists of women to be taken back to the camps. Elisabeth met them at the door every time. She did not let them inside, unless forced. When they asked for names, she provided the ones from the official register, the false ones. When they asked to see the mothers, she led them to women who were not on any deportation list. German officers occasionally passed through Elna on patrol. Once, a Wehrmacht lieutenant stopped by the maternity out of curiosity. Elisabeth showed him the nursery. She let him see the cradles, the tiny bundles sleeping under thin blankets. She did not mention that 3 of those infants were Jewish. She did not mention the hidden registry. She offered him tea. He declined and left. She thought the worst was over. It wasn't. In November 1942, Germany occupied the southern zone. The Gestapo arrived in force. Roundups of Jews intensified. Collaborators began informing on neighbors. The maternity was known now, not just as a place for refugee mothers, but as a place where Jewish women could disappear. That made it dangerous. Elisabeth began moving some of the newborns out of Elne entirely, placing them with sympathetic families in nearby villages or arranging secret transports to Switzerland. She worked with members of the French resistance who had connections across the border. The process was slow, risky, and incomplete. Not every baby could be moved. Not every mother wanted to be separated from her child. Some women stayed, hoping to outlast the war inside the relative safety of the maternity's walls. One December morning, a Gestapo agent appeared at the door with a list of names. Elisabeth recognized 2 of them, mothers currently inside the building. She told the agent those women had already been transferred to another facility. He did not believe her. He pushed past her into the main hall. She followed him, her heart pounding. If he found the hidden registry, it was over. He looked at faces. He checked papers. He found nothing. The 2 mothers he was searching for had been hidden in a storage room behind a false wall, their infants pressed against their chests to keep them quiet. They did not make a sound. The agent left empty-handed. Elisabeth pulled the registry from its hiding place that night and moved it to a new location, a hollowed-out section of floorboard beneath the wash basin. The ink on the last few entries had smudged slightly from her sweating palms. What arrived next was not a mother, but an order signed by higher authorities. In December 1943, a Vichy administrator arrived with new orders. The building was to be vacated within 2 weeks. All occupants were to report to the local police station for registration and relocation. This time, the order came with an implied threat. Failure to comply would result in forced removal. Elisabeth refused again. She wrote letters to Swiss officials, to Red Cross supervisors, to anyone who might intervene. She bought time by pointing to international agreements that protected medical facilities. She reminded the authorities that Switzerland was neutral, that the maternity was under Swiss Red Cross administration, that shutting it down would create a diplomatic incident. It worked for a while. But by early 1944, the pressure had become unbearable. March 1944. 2 Gestapo agents and a Vichy police captain stood at the entrance. They had a document signed by higher authorities. The building was to be requisitioned immediately. All women and infants were to be transported to a relocation center pending verification of identity. Elisabeth stood in the doorway with a 4-day-old infant in her arms. The baby's tiny breath fogged faintly in the cold air. Behind her, 23 mothers and 31 newborns waited in silence. Some of the women were Jewish. Some of the babies had no legal identity beyond the forged papers Elisabeth had created. If those families were taken to a relocation center, they would not come back. "This is a hospital," she said. "You cannot remove patients in active care." The captain gestured to the document. "We have orders." "Then arrest me," she said. "But you will not take these mothers or their children." The standoff lasted 7 minutes. No one moved. Finally, the Gestapo agents turned and left. The captain followed. They did not return that day. But Elisabeth knew the reprieve was temporary. The maternity could not remain open much longer. The risks were too great. She began quietly transferring mothers to other safe houses. She arranged for the most vulnerable infants to be smuggled into Switzerland or hidden with sympathetic French families. By the summer of 1944, only a handful of women remained at the maternity. In September 1944, Allied forces liberated southern France. The Germans retreated. Vichy collapsed. The war in France was over. Elisabeth Eidenbenz closed the doors of the Maternité Suisse d'Elne on October 9, 1944. In 5 years, she had overseen the delivery of 597 babies. Nearly all of them survived. After the war, Elisabeth returned to Switzerland. She did not speak publicly about her work in Elne. She did not write a memoir. She did not seek recognition. For decades, the maternity and the lives it saved remained largely unknown outside of a few scattered survivors and the families who remembered. The Hidden Registry, the book with the real names, its pages still faintly smudged with ink, survived. Elisabeth kept it for years, then donated it to an archive in Switzerland. It became one of the few complete records of the maternity's operations. Researchers who later examined it found detailed entries for each birth: the mother's true name, the infant's name, the circumstances of arrival, the forged identity provided. It was a map of survival written in careful handwriting. For most of her life, Elisabeth received no formal recognition. The French government did not honor her. The Swiss government did not honor her. The Red Cross acknowledged her service only in passing. She was, by all accounts, invisible. It wasn't until the 1990s that historians began seriously investigating the maternity at Elne. Survivors came forward. Documents surfaced. The scale of what Elisabeth had accomplished became clear. In 2002, nearly 60 years after the maternity closed, she was named Righteous Among the Nations by Yad Vashem, the Israeli Holocaust Memorial Authority. She was in her late 80s by then. She accepted the honor quietly and gave a brief speech, thanking the women who had trusted her with their children. She died in 2011 at the age of 97. The reasons for her erasure are familiar. She did not participate in dramatic rescues or headline-making acts of sabotage. Her work was maternal, medical, and quiet, categories that history tends to overlook. Swiss Red Cross supported her work, but the Swiss government preferred not to highlight actions that might have been seen as interference in French or German affairs. A Swiss nurse who defied those officials and saved Jewish lives was an uncomfortable reminder of what could have been done, and wasn't. Elisabeth herself contributed to her own invisibility. She did not publicize her work. She did not court attention. She believed the work spoke for itself, and that those who survived were the only legacy that mattered. Today, the building in Elne is a museum. Visitors can walk through the rooms where mothers gave birth, see the cradles where newborns slept, and read the names from the hidden registry now displayed on the walls. Her hands are visible in many of the images, strong and ink-stained, always in motion. Those hands delivered 597 babies into a world that wanted them dead. They forged the papers that kept those babies off deportation lists. They held the door when authorities demanded entry. They wrote the names in the hidden book, page after ink-smudged page, so that someday, someone might remember. How many other acts of quiet defiance were lost because no one thought to write them down?